The jacket was worth almost nothing. Worn thin at the elbows, faded from years of Lagos sun and rain, it probably couldn't fetch 500 naira at any second-hand market. But on that cold, rain-soaked evening, it was all Chidi had left to give. He didn't know the shivering woman at the bus stop, didn't know her name, her story, or that in just a few weeks, she would change everything about his broken life. All he knew was that she was freezing, and he couldn't just stand there and watch. What happened next would prove that sometimes the smallest act of kindness doesn't just warm someone for a night. Sometimes it rewrites two destinies forever. Heavy rain pounded Lagos like stones falling from the sky. Water poured from dark clouds, filling the drains and making the roads look like flowing streams. Chidi waited at an almost empty bus shelter on Victoria Island, standing under a light that kept blinking on and off. He wore an old dark blue jacket and held a worn folder close to his body. That folder contained 5 copies of his resume, 5 places that had turned him down. He let out a long breath, watching the air form a small cloud in front of him. The evening felt strangely cold because of the heavy rain. He was 42 years old. Once, he'd worked as an engineer designing buildings. Now, his wife was gone, he had a child to care for, and he had nowhere to live. These facts weighed on him, like the water collecting around his feet. A red pharmacy sign nearby showed 8:41 p.m. The bus still hadn't come. Rain had soaked completely through his old shoes. Through the pouring rain, he saw a woman approaching. She seemed about 33, dressed in work clothes, a black skirt and green blouse with no coat, wearing heels that tapped against the wet ground. Her hair stuck to her face, and she hugged herself tightly. She stopped under the same shelter, breathing hard, her hands trembling. Chidi tried not to look at her directly, but he noticed she seemed important, well-dressed, and professional, yet clearly struggling in the freezing rain. She rubbed her bare hands together, trying unsuccessfully to get warm. He looked away. This was just another evening, just another bus ride to no particular destination. Then strong wind blew rain sideways under the shelter. She jerked back, pulling herself into a smaller shape, and Chidi looked at her once more. His jacket wasn't worth much, but it was better than nothing. He could keep it for himself, say nothing, act like everyone else would. But that's not what he did. He said nothing as he took off the jacket. The cold rain stung immediately. He walked closer and offered it to her. She looked surprised. "You don't need to do that." Chidi smiled, though he looked exhausted. "I've already had plenty taken from me today. This jacket, it's the only thing I still have that I can share." She paused. "But you need it more than me." Still, he gently placed it around her shoulders. "Not right now." The unexpected warmth caught her off guard. It smelled clean, like laundry soap, like someone cared. She pulled it closer without thinking. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded, crossing his arms to stay warm. They both stood there silently while rain continued falling. After a minute, she looked at him. "What's your name?" "Chidi." End quote. "I'm Ngozi." "Good to meet you, Ngozi." She studied him briefly. "You shouldn't have given your jacket away." He smiled slightly. "You're probably right, but I couldn't watch you stand there freezing in this weather." The deep sound of a bus engine interrupted the quiet. Its headlights cut through the rain as it stopped. Ngozi walked toward it, then stopped and turned around. "Do you have a place to stay tonight?" Chidi lifted his shoulders slightly. "Somewhere," he answered, not explaining that somewhere meant sleeping in an old broken-down car behind a warehouse in Apapa. She pulled out a business card from her purse and gave it to him. "Just in case you need help with anything." He accepted it and tucked it into his folder without reading it. He didn't think he'd actually use it. People offered help like this often. Most didn't really mean it. Ngozi climbed onto the bus, looked back one final time, with the jacket wrapped around her like protection. Chidi watched until the bus vanished into the rain. Standing alone once more, he shivered. Not because of the cold, but because of something else. Something small, quiet, but powerful. He looked up at the black sky, then down at the empty road. "Maybe things will be better tomorrow," he said softly to himself, then walked into the darkness. Chidi moved slowly through the empty back roads of Apapa, water still falling from the rooftops. He didn't rush. Nobody was expecting him. No home had lights on waiting for him. All he had was his beat-up old Peugeot 504 sitting behind a warehouse in the factory district. He got there just after 9 p.m. The ancient car had rust spots everywhere, and the air conditioning stopped working years ago. The front seat held scattered food wrappers, a pillow shoved in one corner, and a small cooler stuffed under the dashboard. He got inside, closed the door, and sat without moving. From the glove box, he took out a small metal container and opened it. Inside lay an old photograph. His wife, Amara, with a beautiful smile, and their son, Kelechi, maybe 7 years old, grinning in that crooked way kids do. "Sleep well, Amara," Chidi said quietly. "Sleep well, Kelechi." He rested his head back, staring at the car's roof, letting old memories flow through his mind. He used to be Chidi Okafor, an engineer who designed structures. He created things: schools, houses, medical clinics. His wife taught young children at a primary school and laughed easily, even during difficult times. Their son had inherited her laugh, full of happiness and completely honest. They didn't have much money, but they felt satisfied with their lives. Then cancer appeared. When doctors discovered it, the disease had already spread everywhere. Amara died within 9 months. Chidi quit working to take care of her. After she passed, everything fell apart. Medical bills grew into mountains, their savings disappeared. He sold their home and kept moving with Kelechi into smaller and smaller places until all they had left was the car. Even so, he tried protecting his son from the harsh reality. He pretended the back seat was a rocket ship, turned cheap jollof rice made from whatever he could buy into exciting adventures, and called parking lots their playground. Every morning he walked Kelechi to school looking neat, freshly shaved, shirt properly tucked in. "Why do you still dress nicely?" someone at a homeless shelter once asked him. Chidi smiled. "Because my son needs to think life will improve, and I need to look like someone who believes that's true." He took any work available, carrying furniture, repairing roofs, cleaning construction areas. The money wasn't nearly enough, but it kept them together until last year's rainy season. A government social worker got involved. She said their living situation was dangerous. She said Kelechi needed a proper, stable home. Chidi didn't fight back. Deep down, he understood she was correct. With tears blurring his vision, he signed the documents, held his son tight, and made a promise. "This is temporary. I'll get you back." Since that day, every single day felt like climbing a steep hill. He sent out job applications, waited in long lines at employment fairs, attended free training sessions, and studied building regulations at the public library in Yaba. He was creating a plan, carefully, patiently. Tonight made that plan seem impossibly far away. Still sitting in his freezing car, rubbing his arms, trying to create warmth, he thought about Ngozi, the woman from the bus shelter. How completely soaked she'd been, how shocked she looked when he handed her his jacket. He wasn't sure why he'd done it. Perhaps she made him think of Amara, or perhaps he simply needed to feel like he could still do something kind, that he remained the type of person who gave instead of only taking. Outside, rain continued pouring down. Chidi covered himself with a wrapper, pressed his head against the icy window, and closed his eyes. He didn't own much, but he still had his dignity and character, and right now that would need to be sufficient. Ngozi walked into the elegant entrance hall of her apartment building in Ikoyi, where cool air conditioning felt like a soft embrace. The security guard said hello respectfully, but she hardly noticed him. Her shoes tapped quietly on the shiny marble floor as she headed toward the elevator, still wearing the jacket that stranger had given her. She hadn't planned to keep it. Actually, she had tried giving it back. But the man, Chidi was his name, had refused with an expression that stopped her from arguing further. Now, the jacket fit her poorly, far too big and worn thin, but it provided more warmth than anything she'd worn in a long time. She entered her penthouse on the 15th floor and immediately heard nothing. No TV sounds, no music playing, no laughter, only the quiet buzz of expensive appliances and faint raindrops hitting the thick glass windows. Ngozi tossed her purse onto the entrance table and slowly removed the jacket. She was about to put it down when her fingers felt something in an inside pocket. Intrigued, she reached in and found a folded paper. It looked old, bent at the edges, marked with fingerprints and years of handling. She opened it carefully. It was a child's picture drawn with crayons. Two simple stick people held hands beneath a cheerful sun. One said, "Daddy," the other said, "Me." A tiny heart floated between them. At the bottom, in wobbly child's handwriting, it read, "I love you, Daddy, Kelechi." Ngozi couldn't move. She stared at the picture, the words becoming fuzzy as her eyes filled with tears. A shiver went through her body, and she lowered herself onto the edge of her expensive Italian leather sofa, holding the jacket in one hand and the drawing in the other. Her throat felt tight. Kelechi. That name stuck in her thoughts, like something sharp. The way Chidi had clutched that folder, the exhaustion in his face, the heaviness in his words. Everything suddenly became clear. This wasn't just some man who had lent her his jacket. This was a father who still kept a piece of his child near his heart, a father who owned practically nothing but still chose to share. She looked around her apartment. Everything was perfect, tall ceilings, expensive furniture, glass walls, but not one photograph or anything personal. A place built for looking successful, not for feeling comfortable. Ngozi folded the drawing carefully and rested it on her knees. Then, without planning to, she pulled the jacket close and pressed it against her chest. It still carried a faint smell of something she recognized, maybe laundry soap, maybe memories. And suddenly, unexpectedly, tears filled her eyes. She hadn't truly cried in years, not genuinely. Not since she was a young child, hungry and freezing, sitting on her church steps in Mushin, wishing someone would see her. That evening, someone did. A man with compassionate eyes and a tired face. He had removed his own shirt and wrapped it around her shoulders. He didn't talk much, just smiled and said she would be all right. She never encountered that man again, but that single moment transformed everything. Ngozi sniffled and wiped her face with her hand. She wasn't that same little girl now. She had fought her way out of the orphanage system, finished university through scholarships and pure willpower, and grown Zenith Tech Solutions from one simple app concept into one of West Africa's most powerful technology companies. She had worked for every bit of money, every achievement, but somewhere during that journey, she had lost touch with what needing help felt like, what giving help meant. Tonight, a stranger showed her again. She looked once more at the drawing, at that wobbly little heart between the stick figures, then at the jacket in her arms, too large, too old, but filled with significance. And for the first time in many, many years, Ngozi Adeyemi cried, not because something was wrong with her, but because something deep inside her had been softly, wonderfully opened up. The following morning, Ngozi sat at her work desk with a cup of coffee she hadn't touched growing cold nearby. The Lagos city view spread out endlessly through the huge glass windows of her Victoria Island office, but her attention stayed on the wrinkled drawing she held. The paper's edges looked worn from being opened and closed repeatedly, as though she wanted to remember every colored line. She had gotten almost no sleep. She couldn't stop thinking about the previous evening, how Chidi had handed over his only jacket immediately, the quiet respect in his words, the sadness hidden behind his weary smile. Something about him stayed with her, not just his generosity, but the grief he worked so hard to conceal. She picked up her desk phone and pushed the intercom button. A few moments later, her assistant, Adana, walked in. "Yes, Madam Ngozi?" "I need help locating someone," Ngozi said, sounding calm but serious. Adana looked puzzled. "Of course. Who are we looking for? Ngozi paused briefly. His name is Chidi. I don't know his family name. He was waiting at the bus shelter on Amadu Bello Way last night around 8:30. He let me borrow his jacket. I want to find him. Adana seemed surprised, but she agreed. I'll do what I can. And Adana, keep this private. Over the following days, Ngozi's instructions were followed with careful precision. Her staff, normally skilled at tracking down hard-to-find software developers and stolen executives, now focused their abilities on discovering details about a man who lived hidden from view. They collected security camera recordings from nearby stores and hotels. Chidi's image showed up briefly, fuzzy, wearing his jacket. They mapped out the bus route stopping in that location around the time Ngozi got on. By checking unofficial work records, they identified several possible workers. None appeared in professional company databases. Eventually, Adana came back with a slim folder. His name is Chidi Okafor, she explained. He used to work as an engineer who designed buildings. No recent job history. I discovered some internet forum posts where he asked about employment opportunities. He provided a phone number connected to an inexpensive MTN line. No fixed home address. Ngozi looked through the pages. A copy of an expired driver's license photograph, a LinkedIn page that hadn't been updated, a scanned engineering certificate that was no longer valid. No arrest records, no controversies, just emptiness. Ngozi closed the folder. The quiet in the room felt oppressive. Where is he right now? Adana shifted uncomfortably.
One of our people saw him yesterday close to Apapa. There's an old Peugeot 504 sitting behind a storage building.
He's been observed arriving and leaving, using it as a place to sleep. Ngozi stood up. I want to go there. Adana paused. Nosy, are you certain? We could send someone to contact him, or arrange for him to come here. No, Ngozi cut in. This isn't a business appointment. It's personal. Adana remained silent, but her expression softened. I'll arrange for a driver. An hour later, Ngozi rode in the back of a black Mercedes-Benz as it traveled through neighborhoods completely different from conference rooms and modern office buildings. They drove past auto repair shops, street food sellers, and people walking with their heads lowered against the afternoon heat. The driver stopped near the warehouse. Ngozi spotted it right away. The old Peugeot hidden in the shade, rust spreading across its doors. It appeared like it hadn't been driven in many days. She got out into the thick, humid air. The scent of fuel and wet concrete filled the space. Her heels made soft crunching sounds on the gravel as she walked carefully toward the vehicle. Through the front window, she could barely see someone in the driver's seat. As she approached, the door squeaked open. Chidi climbed out, squinting in the bright daylight. He looked at her with confusion initially, then understanding. His face changed. Puzzlement, wariness, then something resembling shame. Ngozi, he said, his voice scratchy from sleeping and shock. She gave a small, unsure smile. Hello, Chidi. He glanced down at himself, at his crumpled clothing, the dirty shoes, the car behind him. What brings you here? I came looking for you, she answered plainly. He frowned, folding his arms. Why would you do that? She paused. Because I couldn't forget what you did. About the type of person who gives away his only jacket to someone he doesn't know. Chidi made a harsh laughing sound. You didn't need to hunt me down for that. A simple text would have been enough. This isn't about saying thank you, she said. It's about not allowing something good to vanish without being noticed. For a long time, they stood quietly. Two people from completely separate lives, brought together by an unexpected gesture during a rainstorm. Chidi finally breathed out. You traveled all this distance just for that? Ngozi nodded. Yes, and perhaps for something beyond that. The next time Ngozi found Chidi, he was working hard over a pile of concrete blocks at a building site near Lekki. She had stayed in her vehicle for 20 minutes, observing from far away as he worked continuously, quietly, carrying, arranging, lifting under the burning sun with the calm determination of someone accustomed to being invisible. He had on an old faded shirt with sleeves pushed up to his elbows despite the heat, and sweat shone on his face. His hands showed thick skin and dirty fingernails. But his actions were careful, quick, and deliberate. When he took a rest and sat on a short wall holding a plastic bag of water, Ngozi got out of the car and walked over to him. Chidi glanced up and looked startled. He jumped to his feet, wiping dust off his pants. "Nosy." "Hello again," she said, her smile soft and real. "What brings you out here?" She offered him a bottle of chilled water she'd carried with her. "I figured you could use something cold." He accepted it cautiously, his eyes questioning. "You really didn't need to do this." "I know, but I chose to." They stood quietly for a moment before she continued. "Would you come somewhere with me? Just briefly? There's something I'd like to share with you." Chidi looked down at his work boots, then back toward the site manager in the distance. "I still have several more hours to work." "I already talked to him," Ngozi explained. "I mentioned you had a job interview." His eyebrows went up. "I don't have any interview scheduled." "You do now," she answered. Chidi released a quick laugh, more shocked than entertained. "All right, let me see what this is all about." They traveled without speaking. Chidi looked out the window, shifting position occasionally, aware of how he looked. Dusty pants, rough hands, the slight smell of sweat on his shirt. Ngozi didn't appear to care. When they reached Zenith Tech Solutions' main building in Victoria Island, Chidi stopped in the grand entrance with its marble floors, staring at the enormous glass walls, the shiny metal surfaces, the constant movement of people wearing business suits and traditional clothing. "I don't fit in here," he whispered. Ngozi faced him. "Just follow me upstairs." They went into a private meeting room with huge windows overlooking the water. Ngozi gestured for him to sit, then shut the door and took a seat facing him. Chidi cleared his throat. "So, what's this all about? Giving back the jacket?" Ngozi shook her head. "No, this has nothing to do with the jacket. I'm keeping it. It belongs to me now." Chidi looked surprised. "All right." She moved closer. "I didn't come to express gratitude. I came because you helped me recall something I'd forgotten. A part of myself I'd hidden beneath years of business meetings and work pressures. You showed me that genuine progress doesn't always begin with new ideas or plans. Sometimes it begins with being kind." Chidi looked down. "Ngozi, I'm simply a man trying to get by. And that's precisely why I asked you here." She pushed a folder across the table toward him. Inside was a job offer, an employment agreement, a new position title, Cultural and Human Values Advisor. Chidi looked confused as he examined the pages. "What is this?" "It's a new position. One I designed. Someone who participates in department meetings, staff training, planning conversations, not to discuss finances or business tactics, but human beings. Principles, caring. You'd talk about your life experiences, help guide the spirit of this organization." Chidi laughed uncomfortably, shaking his head. "Ngozi, look at where I am. I don't have education in psychology. I never finished at University of Lagos. I'm living in a car. You worked as an engineer. I haven't designed anything in years." "You created a moment I'll always remember," Ngozi said quietly. Chidi turned away, feeling overwhelmed. "This isn't a handout," she went on. "This is a job only you can do properly." "You understand what being ignored feels like, what being rejected means, and still you paused in the rain and handed your only jacket to someone you'd never met. That reveals more about true leadership than any job application ever could." He started to speak, stopped, searched for words. "I'm not suitable for this," he said eventually, his voice barely audible. Ngozi leaned closer, her look steady and direct. "You don't need formal education to show people how to care, because you demonstrate it daily." She looked straight into his eyes and continued, "You don't need certificates to teach people about kindness, because you've experienced it. And that carries more weight than anything written on paper." Chidi's throat felt tight. He stared down at the offer. then back at her. And for the first time in many years, he felt something stir inside him. Not anxiety, not hopelessness, but hope. Raw, strange, frightening hope. Chidi sat by himself on a bench outside the tall office building, the job offer lying unopened on his knees. His fingers touched the folder's edges, but his gaze drifted toward the crowded street, unseeing. He couldn't accept it. It wasn't that he lacked desire. Deep inside, part of him wanted to, but fear held him tightly and comfortably, the type that spoke harsh words during sleepless nights. She's just being polite. This isn't genuine. You'll ruin it. You always have. The offer felt like a dangerous trick, disguised as generosity. And Chidi, who had spent years learning never to believe anything that appeared too perfect, couldn't escape the heaviness of uncertainty. He didn't notice Ngozi leave the building and approach him until she settled down beside him without speaking. "You haven't looked at it," she said gently. Chidi made a humorless sound. "Didn't think I had to. I already understand how this story finishes." "How does it finish?" "People like me don't wind up in places like this. You don't create a company like Zenith by employing people who live in vehicles." "You believe I offered you a position out of sympathy?" "I believe I don't have a place in your life." Ngozi stared ahead briefly, then stood up. "Come somewhere with me, just for an hour. No formal clothes, no business discussions, just have faith in me." Going against his better judgment, he stood up. They traveled without talking for more than 30 minutes, leaving behind the city's gleaming skyscrapers and entering a calmer section of Surulere. Eventually, they stopped before a simple painted structure with a worn green cover. A hand-drawn sign announced, "Uncle Tunde's Place, a safe space for every child." Chidi walked inside behind her. The walls were colorful, decorated with handprints, painted creatures, sayings about compassion in Yoruba and English. The space carried a slight scent of crayons and fried dough. Happy laughter rang out from somewhere nearby. Loud, cheerful, genuine children's voices. Ngozi guided him past a shared cooking area, a book room, into a large play space packed with used toys and homemade decorations. Children of various ages were scattered around the floor, assembling puzzles, looking at books, playing games. "This place," Ngozi said softly, "was given the name of the man who rescued me." Chidi turned toward her. "I was raised in children's homes, moved around constantly. Some places were gentle, others weren't. One evening, I escaped. The weather was cold and wet. I was 12 years old. I huddled outside a church in Mushin, simply waiting for sunrise." She stopped speaking. Her voice became softer. "He discovered me, an elderly man called Tunde. He removed his shirt and gave it to me, stayed beside me through the entire night, asked nothing, just remained there." Chidi stayed silent. He was unable to speak. "I never encountered him again," Ngozi went on. "But that experience, it felt like someone extended a hand into the darkness and declared, 'You have value. I created this place because of what he did.'" She turned to look directly at Chidi. "And last week, someone else offered me a jacket. Had no idea who I was. Requested nothing in return. Simply gave." Chidi struggled to swallow. "You make me think of him," she said. "Not because of what you handed me, but because of the person you are." They stood quietly, surrounded by sounds of energy and joy. Chidi's attention moved around the room. The children playing, a helper tying a shoe, a young girl reading out loud with excessive enthusiasm. It felt comforting, authentic. Ngozi touched his arm lightly. "I don't need you to belong in a business meeting, Chidi. I need you to help people remember this. What caring truly means." Chidi didn't reply, not with language. His eyes grew moist now. He looked downward, attempting to hold back tears, but they fell regardless, soft, unprotected tears. And then he nodded his head. Not for the employment, not for the money or the position title, but because for the first time in many years, he experienced it. He was still wanted, still valuable, still a complete person. Chidi stood completely still in the middle of a space filled with happiness and laughter, a single tear running down his lined face, not from sorrow, but from the deep comfort of understanding he still had worth. Chidi's first day at Zenith Tech Solutions didn't begin with celebration. There was no welcoming event, no announcement to the media, just a quiet gathering in a small room with glass walls on the 5th floor with several doubtful managers and a pile of note papers. Ngozi had presented him plainly. "This is Chidi Okafor. He's here to help us create something more important than just making money." The expressions were courteous but unsure. But Chidi didn't back down. He started by telling his story. Not the pitiful version, not the attention-grabbing type. Just fragments. Truthful fragments. What losing everything felt like. Waking up in a hot car. Walking into job meetings, knowing your shoes had openings. Choosing to be kind regardless. Initially, they listened with careful interest. By the end of that first week, they were paying close attention. Chidi had a style of talking that didn't lecture or act. He posed questions that made people stop and think. When did you last truly make eye contact with someone? Do you know what the cleaning person who washes this floor is called? What would you do if you noticed someone weeping in the staff room? He didn't arrive with graphs or statistics. He arrived with understanding. Gradually, a change started happening. One after another, workers began approaching him. First, the trainees, then junior programmers, then managers. Some came to discuss pressure, others about exhaustion. A few came simply to sit peacefully during lunch breaks. Chidi listened. And when he talked, he didn't provide answers. He provided viewpoint. "You're not damaged," he once told a young computer programmer who admitted he hadn't slept in 3 days. "You're simply exhausted. Being exhausted doesn't mean you're fragile. It means you've given concern for too long without receiving concern in return." That sentence ended up stuck to office doors, printed on coffee cups, repeated in company-wide messages. Ngozi observed everything happen from her executive office. She noticed how casual conversations shifted, how laughter came back, how work output increased, not because of demands, but because people felt acknowledged. Before long, Chidi had an official workspace of his own, compact, comfortable, packed with plants, used books, and a tea kettle that always seemed full. Outside of the office, life started rebuilding, in gentle, significant ways. With Ngozi's assistance and a small housing allowance from the organization, Chidi managed to make a down payment on a humble 2-bedroom apartment in Jibagata. It wasn't fancy, but it had an outdoor space, a small gardening area, and walls that didn't shake in strong wind. More significantly, it had space for Kelechi. Now attending his first year at the University of Lagos, Kelechi had returned to live with his father. Their first meal in the new apartment was basic, jollof rice and fried plantain. But Chidi would treasure that memory forever. "You fulfilled your promise," Kelechi had said that evening, with tears in his eyes. Chidi hadn't responded. He was unable to, not with language, but the expression on his face communicated everything. As for Ngozi, she and Chidi encountered each other almost daily. Initially, it centered on professional matters, meetings, planning, working together. Then, without planning it, it transformed into something deeper. They began having lunch together, then walking to the parking area together. Then weekend trips to Uncle Tunde's place evolved into evenings spent viewing old Nollywood movies, discussing everything and nothing. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't rushed. It simply occurred naturally. They were two individuals who had spent years constructing protective barriers around themselves, only to discover peace in the calm companionship of someone who requested nothing except being present. One late afternoon, as they stood on the building's rooftop, observing the sunset over Lagos Island, Ngozi said quietly, "You've transformed this place, Chidi." He laughed gently. "No, I simply help them remember what they already understood." She looked at him. "You helped me remember too." Chidi had just wrapped up a training session about staying strong through hardship when a young man stayed behind after everyone else had gone. He appeared no more than 22 years old, thin, lacking color in his face, eyes showing lack of sleep. "I needed to tell you something," he said, his voice trembling. "Last month, I planned to give up. Everything. My life, I mean. I was finished. But then I listened to you talk, and it changed my mind." Chidi remained motionless, his heart beating hard. "You mentioned something about how people don't require fixing. They simply require someone to listen. Nobody had ever told me that before. It seemed like someone actually noticed me for the first time." The young man struggled to speak. "If you hadn't been there, I don't believe I would be standing here now." Chidi's chest felt constricted. He moved closer and put his hand on the young man's shoulder. "I'm truly grateful you are." After the young man walked away, Chidi lowered himself into his chair, the space suddenly silent, those words repeating in his thoughts. The entrance hall of Zenith Tech Solutions had never appeared like this previously. The usual displays celebrating business accomplishments and new products were absent. Instead, gentle white fabric hung everywhere. Chains of cozy lights decorated the space, and a large sign displayed in beautiful script, "One Kindness Day." Workers stood close together, wearing their finest clothes, not for professional reasons, but for something much more important. On the main platform, Ngozi Adeyemi walked up to the speaking stand, her gaze moving across the gathered people. "This day isn't about numbers," she started. "It's about experiences." The room became silent. "A year ago, I was waiting at a bus shelter during heavy rain, by myself, exhausted, and more confused than I understood. And then, a man I'd never encountered did something nobody else did that evening. He handed me his jacket. A sound of understanding moved through the audience. Ngozi smiled gently. It was aged, threadbare, but it meant everything, because it showed me that genuine compassion doesn't wait for the perfect moment. It appears when the world doesn't anticipate it. She faced the display stand next to her and lifted the covering draped across it. There, protected behind glass, was that exact same jacket. Damaged at the sleeves, color faded from many years of wearing, but displayed like something precious. Below it, written on a metal plate, were the words, "One small act of kindness can rewrite a life." Ngozi's voice shook slightly. "That gesture didn't just improve my evening. It altered the direction of my entire life. And today, we celebrate not just that experience, but the man who created it." She looked toward the platform's edge. "Chidi, would you join me up here?" Chidi rose gradually from his chair, wearing a basic suit, borrowed from someone he knew, but carefully ironed. He walked through the clapping. His face, still marked with age and struggle, now showed something different, something calm. He stepped up next to her. Ngozi reached into her pocket and took out a small envelope. "This is yours," she said. Chidi opened it. Inside was the ownership document for his new apartment, officially stamped and legal. Surprised sounds came from the audience. Ngozi moved closer with a smile. No more living in vehicles. The room filled with clapping once more, but Chidi raised a hand. "I actually have something as well," he said, reaching carefully into his jacket pocket. From it, he removed a small container, plain, aged, obviously kept for quite some time. He looked at Ngozi, heart racing. "You mentioned this jacket transformed your life, but you transformed mine. You returned my identity, my son, a home, and hope." He opened the container. Inside sat a gold ring. Not showy, but glowing softly beneath the lights. "I stored it in the pocket," he said, voice shaking, "because if there's anything more precious than this jacket, it's you." Ngozi looked at him, eyes becoming wet. "Ngozi Adeyemi, will you become my wife?" A moment of quiet. Then she laughed, a gentle, emotional, lovely sound, and nodded while crying. "Yes, absolutely, yes." The audience stood up together, cheering and clapping, the sounds bouncing off the tall glass roof. He had previously questioned whether he would ever be significant again. Now he possessed his answer. 1 month afterward, they got married. The wedding wasn't organized in a luxurious event space or an expensive hotel. It happened at Uncle Tunde's place, the small decorated community building that held deep meaning for both of them. Children created paper blossoms. The seating didn't coordinate. The wedding cake was made by one of the trainees from Chidi's guidance program, but the space radiated something wealth couldn't purchase. Ngozi wore a plain white gown with traditional coral jewelry around her neck, her hair styled in loose natural waves. Chidi once more wore that identical suit, now carefully cleaned and ironed. Kelechi stood beside him as his supporter, glowing with happiness. The attendees were helpers, colleagues, people from homeless shelters, and many young workers who had previously visited Chidi's small office looking for direction. Several relatives danced in their colorful Ankara fabric, and the aroma of jollof rice and finger foods filled the space. During the promises, Ngozi held Chidi's hands and gazed into his eyes. "Once you offered me a jacket," she said, her voice steady and confident. "Tonight, I offer you my entire life." Her words spread across the room like sunshine through colored glass. Gentle, glowing, memorable. Chidi was speechless. He simply nodded, tears rolling down his face as the people around them wiped their own eyes. Laughter came next. Music started. High life, Afro beats, old favorites. The celebration moved outside into the yard, where children ran without shoes and chains of small lights swayed in the pleasant evening breeze. Someone captured a photograph. Chidi and Ngozi stood beneath the Uncle Tunde's place sign next to each other, her head resting on his shoulder, his arm wrapped around her. And near them, on a display stand, sat the old jacket. Quiet, aged, and now preserved forever. That picture would later spread across the internet, forwarded, reposted, and discussed throughout Nigerian social media and elsewhere. A representation not just of new opportunities, but of how something as basic as compassion could extend into the darkness and transform everything. Sometimes the tiniest action, a jacket, a smile, a caring word, can travel farther than we could ever expect. Chidi didn't possess much, but he shared what he had available. And in exchange, he didn't just alter Ngozi's life. He discovered love, meaning, and a fresh start. Their story shows us all. Compassion doesn't demand perfection, just being there, just caring. If this story moved you, if it showed you that hope still exists in surprising places, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Here we share the narratives that comfort the spirit, rebuild your trust in people, and remind us what's genuinely important. Until we meet again, stay compassionate and keep having faith.